Hello everyone, my name is Jim Ince and I'm a professor of art here at Porterville College. I'm the coordinator of the Cultural and Historical Awareness Program. The Porterville College Cultural and Historical Awareness Program was organized in 2002 to enhance awareness on campus and the community for important aspects of our culture to which we may previously had little or no exposure. So each year, the members of CHAP, including PC faculty, staff, and others, choose a theme for the events, and faculty are encouraged to integrate the theme into their courses and encourage student participation at the events. Additionally, events such as guest speakers, panel discussions, and exhibitions are organized throughout the year and open to the public. If you are interested in participating in CHAP, or if you know of a guest speaker or two, let me know. You can contact me through chap@portervillecollege.edu. Our theme for this year is CHAP's 20th year anniversary. Our event today on Manzanar was the topic of the very first CHAP event 20 years ago, and it involved today's speaker, Elisa Lynch, Manzanar's team leader for interpretation and visitor services. She oversees the site's efforts in visitor services, education, publications, exhibit design, social media, and oral history. Elisa started working at Manzanar on September 9th, 2001, and was shortly after that when she met Porterville professor Richard Osborne. Their meeting planted the seeds of what became Porterville's CHAP program. Since then, hundreds of Porterville students have visited Manzanar through field trips and service projects. One student even became a Manzanar employee. The presentation today is about the Manzanar War Relocation Center, and this center is preserved by the National Park Service. Here is Elisa Lynch. Thank you. Take it away.
Good morning. Let me see if I can get my screen up here. I guess it's asking me which screen to share. Okay, are you all seeing the slide? Hopefully.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so good morning. My name is Elisa Lynch, and it's a real honor to be here today. Of all the programs I've ever done at Manzanar, the very first one I did for the public was on February 19th, 2002. And Richard Osborne just happened to be in the audience for that program. And it's amazing now to see CHAP in its, 20 years later. Trying to get my screen to move forward here. Just one moment. Okay, there we are. 20th anniversary. And so when I met Richard 20 years ago, we began this kind of love affair, not a real love affair for each other, but for history. And to see that having evolved into the Cultural Historical Awareness Program is really amazing. And I've been interested over the years to see all the different projects you all have focused on. But it was an honor that Manzanar was the very first one, the area of focus. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the history of Manzanar and also how we as the National Park Service manage Manzanar and do the work that we do. I want to tell you we have an incredibly special guest who has joined us. Her name is Rosie Maruki Kakauchi and her daughter Judy, and they are watching from Las Vegas. And so we may have a chance to ask Rosie some questions a little bit later. And you will see that she is in some of the slides. And we're going to talk a little bit about her family story. And a shout out, I don't know if he's on this program, but Jacob Kasimov started out in the Porterville CHAP program and worked several years with us at Manzanar in archaeology. So you never know, it can turn into a job. So well, let me go back for a second. A lot of people think of Manzanar as being Japanese American history. We often think of Native American history. This is Women's History Month, where in fact, history happens to every group in every month. And I think it's all American history. And so Even though Manzanar, its main impact was on Japanese Americans during World War II, it really is part of American history. And this is a photograph of the site in 1942. Now, a lot of people think that the story of Manzanar started with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. In fact, there was a huge amount of anti-Asian, anti-Japanese, anti-Chinese sentiment for decades before the war. It was Pearl Harbor, perhaps, that allowed that racism to kind of get into motion with Executive Order 9066, which President Roosevelt signed on February 19th, 1942. And so it's interesting, I did that program for the 60th anniversary, and here we are at the 80th. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, originally the police departments, the FBI, they went around and they arrested certain people that they thought might be suspicious. It doesn't mean that they were guilty of anything, but they rounded up select people from the Japanese community, some Germans, some Italians. But the difference was Executive Order 9066 allowed the US military to round up and exclude, they said, any or all persons. And that was applied only, however, to Americans of Japanese ancestry. So it's very interesting because, these people had not had any sort of trial. It was guilt by, I guess, DNA, right? Because most of the people, 2/3 were American citizens born in this country, like Rosie and her sisters and brother. And so it's very interesting because those who were not citizens could not become citizens by law until the 1950s. And so this is a sign that was in Oakland, California, where somebody is saying, I'm an American. I think in times of war, sometimes we forget that, this is a very big, very diverse country, even back then. So this sign has always resonated with me. And like I said, we are talking about American history. So during the 1940s, most people of Japanese ancestry lived on the West Coast. There were on the West Coast, like I said, many, many communities. The Army decided that they were going to remove people of Japanese ancestry from the West Coast because that's where the perceived danger was. Although, there was never anybody arrested for sabotage or espionage. Well, there were 10 Caucasians who were arrested for spying for Japan. The only case of sabotage I know of before people went to the camps was there was a strawberry farmer who was told he could not harvest his crop before he went to camp. And so he plowed it under and was accused of sabotage because the strawberries had been needed for the war effort. But this is where people came from. It was the western half of Oregon and Washington, all of California, and the southern half of Arizona. And they were sent to these camps called war relocation centers. That was, how they were termed at the time. Many people would call them concentration camps because they did concentrate people. There's a lot written about terminology, and we have a link to one of those papers on our website. So these camps, you can see some of them, like Manzanar, are actually within the exclusion zone. Some of them outside, like Arkansas, very far away. But this is where more than 110,000 people were rounded up and sent to these camps. You'll hear me talk sometimes about 120,000 people, or you'll hear me talk about 110,000. And the difference is it was a little over 110,000 who were removed from their homes and communities. But within these 10 camps, you had 120,313 people, including almost 6,000 babies born during the war. This is a picture of people being sent to the camps. They were told you can bring only what you can carry. And so you see people have a lot of things in their arms. They didn't know where they were going, how long they would be there, what would happen when they got there. This is a group arriving in Lone Pine, California. If you've never been up here, it's basically on the opposite side of the mountains, almost exactly from you. As the crow flies, it's probably like 60 miles, but as the crow drives, it's like 200 miles. So this is people arriving in Lone Pine, getting on a bus to go to Manzanar. And, you know, some of these slides I'm going to go through somewhat quickly because they are available online. We also have a YouTube channel with our movie and other resources available as well. But you can see there's kids, there's older people. They had people from newborn to 86 years old in Manzanar. This is an early photograph. You can see some of the men who came early to supposedly help set up the camp, even though they were treated as laborers. And they are under armed guard with the bayonet and a rifle and a military policeman. The irony is that because of the immigration laws, if you were on the last boat over from Japan, you would have come at least in 1924, because that's when the Immigration Act started limiting immigration from Japan and some other countries. And so the irony is that a lot of these people, the older generation, had been here in the United States, living in the United States, longer than the MPs with them had been alive. This is as the camp is first getting set up. People are arriving as the camp is literally being built. It was an Army Theater of Operations camp. They built, you know, 2 barracks. I think it was 2 barracks every 15 minutes. They built 800 barracks or buildings, you know, in a matter of months. And this is people arriving. You can see it is dusty. It had been a pre-war town, but it was bulldozed. So it is dusty and people are arriving with their possessions. This is a gentleman from Bainbridge Island, Washington, and he is with his wife, and that's actually his little girl in the doorway. I include this slide, well, one, because it shows you the early conditions, but also because of the immigration laws that I mentioned earlier. Many of the men who came over initially in the 1880s, early 1900s, because of the anti-miscegenation laws and because of the immigration laws, many of them were not able to get married until later. And so you have a lot of the men in the camp who were becoming first-time fathers around the same age that their contemporaries were becoming grandfathers. So you also have a lot of interesting generational dynamics based on factors out of their control, like immigration laws. And any one of these topics, you know, I could talk forever on, but I just think that's interesting. That's his little girl. That's the Takemoto family from Bainbridge Island. This is some early living conditions. You know, you have a room that's 20 by 25 feet, 8 cots, and it really was that crowded. And depending on the number of people in your family, you might have complete strangers in those rooms with you. This is a mess hall. Everything is served cafeteria style. It was a big change for a lot of people because you go from having your own home and kitchen and control over what you eat to being served meals 3 times a day. Every mess hall got the exact same food. Some mess hall cooks were talented and had cooked before. Some had been tractor mechanics and took the job because it paid well. And so there were all kinds of challenges and politics surrounding food in the mess halls. This is a meal time. You can see the picnic tables, people just kind of crowded in. And there are a lot of impacts to family structure because of these changes. Manzanar also had an orphanage. It was one of the only camps to have an orphanage of all the 10 camps. And there were kids there ranging from newborn to 19 years old. This is an early picture of school. When the government moved all these people, it didn't really think about things like schooling and medical care and all of these necessities. So this is an early school photograph. This one is a little bit later. And we do have a whole exhibit on school in the camp. There were about 2,600 people who attended school in Manzanar. This is an understatement. History is not always easy to understand or to accept. And this is certainly true of Manzanar when it was becoming a National Historic Site 30 years ago. There was a lot of debate and a lot of people said, you know, forget it. We don't need to talk about it. It's over. It's done. It's kind of, you know, I know that it's a hot button topic to talk about critical race theory, but this, you know, a lot of these historic sites exist specifically to learn about what we've done in the past and to hopefully learn to do better. Another thing, of course, is that history is about real people. This is Fumi and Natalie Hayashida, again, of Bainbridge Island, Washington. One of the most amazing things about working at Manzanar is getting to know people who were here, like my dear friend Rosie. And also, this is Fumi Hayashida and her daughter Natalie in 2011, when Fumi came back for the first time at age 100. And that's her little baby girl that she was carrying. We help people preserve the past, and their memories for the sake of the future. Just a couple of quick stories. This is one gentleman, Hikoji Takeuchi, who came here from Los Angeles. This was a picture of him in 1939, before the war. It was him and his kid sister and his parents, and his dad died right before the war. He also had a brother and sister in Japan who he'd never met, who did not survive the war. This is him in 2002. 20 years ago, when I first met him and was able to do an oral history interview with him. He had one of the most incredible stories, because he had been shot in the camp by a military police while collecting wood to make a table and chairs for his mother and his sister. And after we did the interview, we've been able, he's in our park film. We've done these biographical booklets. So we, use personal stories to try to help convey the history and the lessons of Manzanar. Obviously, history is not a single story. And this is one of the themes that we have. And what I titled this presentation is, 10,000 lives, 10,000 stories. And that is because every person who was in Manzanar or impacted by Manzanar has their own story in their own words. And while people may have had common experiences back then, they didn't all have the same experience then, and they don't all have the same perspectives now. Just as a quick example, a couple of stories, and one of them is the story of Rosie, who's with us today. She is the cute little girl on the left, and the smallest cute girl on the left. But two families from Boyle Heights, the Miyatakis and the Marukis. So this is Rosie's mom, Koharu Maruki, when she immigrated to the United States. Within a few years, this is her and her family. So her husband Shinkichi and Koharu are in the back. And then their daughters from the left, on the left is Grace, on the far right is Ruby, their brother Kao, and cute little Rosie, who still looks exactly the same, by the way. The Miyataki family, who were also very dear friends of the Marukis, Toyo and Hiro, they also had 4 kids, except they had 1 girl and 3 boys. And so their kids from left are Bobby, Richard, Archie, and then the little girl is Minnie. And so I'm going to highlight the oldest of each of these families, Archie Miyatake and Ruby Maruki. So when Ruby comes to Manzanar, she was pregnant, and she'd been married and she was pregnant. She had a very difficult pregnancy, and coming to the camp and being in the living conditions were very difficult for her. She went into labor in August 1942, and she actually hemorrhaged to death, giving birth to twin girls. And she died in the Manzanar hospital. And this is a picture of the funeral for her and for the baby girls, with Rosie's family and many friends there. This is kind of the worst scenario of, of what can happen in the camp, losing people you love, and people's lives being impacted, for generations. And that same day, by the way, Fumiko Hayashida went into labor at the Manzanar Hospital, same doctor, same hospital, and she delivered a baby boy named Leonard. Fumiko was the one holding her little girl. And this is a picture of me with Rosie on the left and her sister Grace, who we lost about 1.5 years ago, looking at that same photograph in our exhibits today. And they have been incredibly generous with sharing their story. And, their story is not just one of loss, but that is a huge part of what happened to them in Manzanar. So you can imagine that what they remember of that place and losing a loved one is pretty difficult to contemplate. Now, Archie's story is a little brighter, a little happier. Not that he didn't also have down times in camp, but when he came, he was in high school. You can see here he's at some sort of an event. And he, by the way, is in the same class as Rosie. Archie passed away a few years ago, but you can see how much fun he's having here at this class dinner. Eventually, he met a young lady from, oh, look at that fun. He looks so excited. Eventually, he meets a young lady named Takeko Maeda, and they fell in love. They were together in camp. They fell in love, and they married in 1949. Now, they loved coming back to Manzanar because it's where they met, where they fell in love. This park, Merritt Park, which I'll show you more pictures of later, they loved to go back there because it was their courting spot. And this is a lunch my husband and I went out with them, and Archie asked me how things were going at Manzanar because he was always very curious to know, what visitors thought and who was coming. And he said, I have some good memories of that place. I met my wife there. And just at that moment, she leaned over to him and I snapped this picture on my phone. And it's one of my favorite pictures because it is a reminder that despite the hardships and heartbreak that people went through, you have, people who found love, who found friendships. This is their last visit back in 2015, and they're listening to oral history interviews. Now, this is the headstone for Archie's parents, which is in Boyle Heights at Evergreen Cemetery. And in fact, he is now interred there as well. And behind this headstone for his parents, there's another headstone, the Maruki headstone. And so just as these families, lived in a same area before the war, they came to Manzanar, they lived in neighboring blocks, block 20 and 21. And, now in some ways they are forever together in history, but also literally in this place. Or at least I used to be able to say that because in fact, Rosie and Grace had their parents and Ruby and the baby girl's ashes moved to the Nishi-Honganji temple. But Evergreen was going to charge her $700 to take down the tombstone, so she left it there so I can still use it in my slide program. But the idea that, we are forever entwined with places and in history. In fact, on our site brochure, we have the photo. It's on the right-hand side there. It says, Two Families, Two Stories, and specifically talks about the contrast. And this is, again, not to say that the Miyatakis had all happy memories or that the Marukis had all sad memories, but just a reminder that there's a whole spectrum of human experiences. This is original artwork also on our brochure by a gentleman named Kongo Takamura, and you can see the windstorm, which is very common in Manzanar. And then the back of it, we have the picture of Fumi and Natalie and the map of the site. So I hope if you haven't visited, you will. And if you get anywhere near Richard Osborne, he will bring you here. This is today, people can come to the site. It had over 800 buildings during the war. We just have a handful of reconstructed buildings. This is the latrine building in block 14. It is a reconstruction on the original slab. And so those are the exact model toilets that people had here in camp. They are the American standard modernus. And this is what the women's restroom looked like. And I told these young ladies, they're the only people I've ever known that smiled in a Manzanar latrine. One of the women who came to Manzanar, her name is Cherry Yamada Ueda. She talked about when she first got here, they had to fill their mattress with straw, which was, humiliating. But she said, when she saw these toilets, she said, "What is this? Is this for us?" I just talked to her a few weeks ago about something else, and she mentioned the latrines again. And she said, she's over 90 years old now, and she said, "I still think of them and it gives me nightmares." So, to visitors today, it's a chance to see this and contemplate, but I don't know that we can ever really know what it was like to be enduring these conditions. There also, of course, were sites of beauty at Manzanar. This is a photograph from Ansel Adams in 1943. It's a garden called Merritt Park. Again, that's the place that Archie and Take courted. This is it today. We've rebuilt the bridge, and obviously we don't have the water features, but you can still see the rocks. If you look in the lower left of this photo, you can see the Turtle Rock. And that is still there in the bushes at the lower left of the image. And if Jacob is with us today, he is someone who has done a bunch of work on cultural resources and helping to restore Merritt Park. And then this is a photo of the past put together with a present photo today. And you can see how much the trees have grown. Even though on the landscape today, it doesn't really look like it did, with the water and the lawns and the trees, but it gives you a sense. And of course, it's a really incredible landscape to visit. One of the most important things we do, besides preserving the landscape, is an oral history program. We've done over 650 oral histories, and those include Hikoji and Cherry and Rosie and Grace and Archie. Lots of these stories. And this woman, actually, her name was Jeannie Hisai Obana. And Jeannie was born in the United States. She's an American citizen, but her family, her father moved the family back to Hiroshima before the war. And he was going to build a beautiful house there and live the rest of his life. And he died before he could build his home, but the family did not have money to come back to the United States. And she was actually within a mile of the epicenter at Hiroshima during the bombing. And she went through her whole life believing that she would be dead in a matter of months because of the radiation. And she was followed for the rest of her life by the Atomic Energy Commission, or the team that evaluated people's health. And she had several children, and each time she said there were like 20 doctors in the room because they wanted to see, were there going to be effects from her being in the Hiroshima bombing on the child? And that was not the case, but she lived to be 93 years old, having believed for many, many years that she was at the end of her life. And we have, if you go to our YouTube channel, which you can just search Manzanar NPS YouTube, you can see her interview and many other snippets. So you can listen to these stories directly from the people who shared them. With her is my colleague, Rose Masters. And I know there's a lot of, I don't have a lot of pictures of park staff in here, but in fact, there is a whole team of people, 12 to 15 employees, depending on whether or not we have seasonal employees, who work at Manzanar, every day or every season to do all that we're doing. We also have a museum collection, has a number of artifacts from Rosie and her sister. There is a virtual museum online. So if you just search for Manzanar Virtual Museum, you can see many of the objects that we have in our collections. And in fact, the painting at bottom right was donated to Manzanar by Rosie. Lots and lots of things that you can also see in person when you visit Manzanar. This is, and then sometimes there's more fun stuff that we do. This is actually a photo of the 4th of July parade in Independence, which is the town 6 miles north of Manzanar. And there's a certain irony that this camp, of 11,070 people was within 10 minutes of a town called Independence. This is from 2016, and it's with the Oda family, who are good friends of Rosie and us. And so my husband and I made a cemetery monument out of styrofoam ice chests. And this is our little Manzanar entry in the local parade. But the coolest thing, of course, in case it's not obvious, is working with the people themselves. Being a history nerd, I worked at Independence Hall 30 years ago, and everyone there, has been gone since before 1800, pretty much. And so to be able to know and call on people today, I contact Rosie multiple times a week to ask her questions. And she always comes through. She remembers and knows everyone and everything. But this is one of the funner things that we try to do, is some outreach. Of course, we haven't been able to do any of this during COVID, but we're hoping, knock on wood, to get back to a broader ability to do things. We also tell other aspects of the site's history. Even though Congress created the site for its World War II history, there's a lot of pre-war history there, including, of course, the indigenous people, the Numu and the Niue people, who call this valley Payahunadu, land of flowing water. And this picture is actually, we believe, taken from what later became the Manzanar site. And so we do work with indigenous communities, and we're working with them to tell more of that story, because in fact, they have their own, excuse me, their own American story, which included a forced march on foot of 1,000 people from this valley in July of 1863. They were forced marched to Fort Tejon, just south of Bakersfield, in the July sun. Along the way, many of them were murdered, some of them died, some of them were raped, some escaped. And this is, another very significant part of the valley's history. I always like to say that the Owens Valley is really like a little microcosm of history of the American West, because you have all of these same stories happening in the same place, where you have, people living their lives since time immemorial on the resources and in the valley. Then you have settlers coming in, and then you have conflicts, and almost always it is the natives, who pay the ultimate or the great sacrifice of lives. But they did not go away. I think a lot of people think of indigenous peoples as people who lived in the past, where in fact they are still very much here today and want to preserve and to share their stories. This is a group from several years ago called First Bloom, and these are children from the Bishop Paiute Reservation who came down to work in the Manzanar orchards, because Manzanar was a pre-war town. Between 1900, 1924, it was a town that the city of Los Angeles eventually bought out for the water rights. But these indigenous kids come down and they help to work in the orchard. And when we have fruit harvests, we give the fruit from Manzanar, from these 100-year-old trees, we give them out to tribal elders, senior lunch programs. If you come in the fall, you can very well eat a piece of history, because we give away pears from the historic orchard in the visitor center. So it's not everywhere you can go and eat history. We worked with a family named the Button family from Lone Pine. Irene Button was born just south of Manzanar. That's her in the photo in the pink shirt, well, the long sleeve pink shirt, with two of her sons, and our ranger Mark, who has since retired, and our intern Rocio, who they helped to put together this exhibit that's in our visitor center. And they actually donated these artifacts so that we would have them in our collection. There's also a nearby museum, Eastern California Museum here in Independence, just 6 miles north of the site. And they have a fabulous collection of Paiute and Shoshone artifacts and basketry and other parts of history. They also have a pair of dentures made out of coyote's teeth. You can't see that just everywhere. Just last weekend, I had a couple little friends with me. They're 3 and 6 years old. And I took them down to Manzanar. They got their junior ranger badges, but it was really cool to see these little kids seeing some of their own history. And the little guy at the left, Henry, is the same age as Irene is in the picture that's just above his head to the left. She's 3 years old there. And he's 3 years old, almost 100 years later, looking at these artifacts. So we're hoping to do more with telling the indigenous stories of Manzanar. And we're in fact working on a new junior ranger booklet, which will include more of that, as well as new site brochures on the pre-war aspects of Manzanar's history. Also, of course, there's a lot of other cultural ties. This is the monument at the Manzanar Cemetery during a pilgrimage. Part of the Manzanar pilgrimage, which, by the way, is virtual this year, again, for the third year. And if you go to manzanarcommittee.org, you can get information about that, because it's really amazing. But that pilgrimage started in 1969 as a public pilgrimage, and it's a part of a partly political rally, partly religious service. When they first came back in 1969, a newspaper reporter asked someone how many people were buried there, and a guy named Jim Matsuoka replied 120,000. In that, he felt that the whole community lost part of itself over the 3 years, 8 months that they were confined behind barbed wire in these American camps. So there's also, if you're in Los Angeles over the next few months, there's also an exhibit at Japanese American National Museum right now called Sutra and Bible. And it's about the role of religion in people's lives in camp. And in fact, if you look below the characters on the monument, you see a wooden cross. And that is actually on the exhibit at Japanese American National Museum. But I strongly encourage you to attend the virtual pilgrimage. And I know that Professor Richard Osborne has brought many, many students over the years to be part of the pilgrimage, to be part of the archaeological digs here. And these are some young women at the pilgrimage a few years ago. And I really, appreciated their message. And, while Manzanar's history, the focus of the folks there, the focus on the folks there was Japanese Americans, but in fact, there are a lot of people who are seeing connections to this history in their own lives. You don't have to watch much news to see relevant things with immigration, refugees, war. All of the things just keep resonating over time. And hopefully, people can learn, we can learn and do better each time. And this is, I think it's really cool because there's a strong connection between many Muslim Americans and Japanese Americans, like the young lady in this photograph. Coming to Manzanar can change people's lives. That's an understatement. It certainly has changed mine in the 20 years I've worked there. And the median age of my friends now is about 98. But I love this drawing that someone put in one of our comment books, and hope for friendship. I think one of the most moving comments I have ever seen in a comment book is this one from October 30th, 2015. And it says, "I have been prejudiced all my life against Japanese, 75 years. As of today, that is all gone. I am so ashamed. I cry as I write this. Thank you." And I have reflected on this many times because, of course, we've done a lot of work at Manzanar, and you don't always know what the impact of that is going to be. We know, in doing oral histories with former incarcerees, working with their families, that is incredibly meaningful to them and to history. But we don't always know with visitors, how seeing this site impacts them. And I think if visiting this site and having an experience to be able to look through the eyes of other people, if it has the ability for someone who's 75 years old to rethink his prejudice, it gives me hope that people will see, our common humanity, and that we all have much more in common than we have different. So, the National Park Service, of course, we're very proud to preserve the Statue of Liberty. The White House is a National Park Service unit, all of these amazing things in US history. But we also have to remember that US history is not only about the glory and the hope, but sometimes it's also about reality and the times that we have failed to live up to our Constitution. So that's a brief introduction to Manzanar and an invitation, obviously, to visit. We also have internships, seasonal, opportunities, other things. But with that, I'm going to close out my program, and we have some time for Q&A. And I know that Rosie said she's willing to answer some questions also. So if you want to talk to someone who actually lived here, that is an experience that you don't get all the time. So anyway, back to the hosts.
Thank you so much. Are there questions for our speaker or for Rosie? Yes.
Yes, a question. What were some of the social, cultural activities during your stay at Manzanar?
Rosie, do you want to answer that? You might be on mute. Well, I can start answering until we hear Rosie's voice. Are you there, Rosie? So there were all kinds of social and cultural activities. You have people of all ages. So you have, you have sports, you have crafts, you have, music, all the kinds of things that people did outside of the camp. You also have some people who did Japanese cultural, traditional activities, and people who did, more Americanized. You had judo and baseball, kendo and football. Sometimes when people argue over what Manzanar was, you have, you definitely have elements of the concentration camp. You have a 5-strand barbed wire fence, you have 8 guard towers, you have searchlights, you have 130 military police. So those are all features of a concentration camp, but you also have, sports teams, a homecoming queen, all of these things. Well, actually she was called Queen of Manzanar, but things that have elements of summer camp. And so it's everything in between. Are you with us, Rosie?
Yeah, she fixed it.
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So what do you want to know?
He was asking about the social and cultural activities in camp.
Oh, well, amazingly, we had many, many different clubs, but men and women, girls and boys. And like the Manzanites, which was my brother's club, they used to hold dances, Thanksgiving dinners, and our Modernaires, we used to have our parties, and we invite anyone to come, and we fix meals. And so if they realize that our meal, what we're going to serve is real good, then we get a whole bunch of people coming. But the social part of having a dance was really, really one of the top things that we really enjoyed. But sports also was one of the main things that kept us all going, and especially baseball, and especially for our older Issei's, our parents, they loved baseball. And so that was one of the main things that they enjoyed. And just to tell you how much they enjoyed it, after the war, as I was walking down the Japanese town in Los Angeles, one Issei man stopped me and says, "Rosie, I just want to tell you how much we enjoyed watching the Dusty Chicks play baseball. That really made our day." And so I said, wow, I didn't realize we made such an impact. But that's Issei's love baseball. But other than that, our club activities, sports, I guess that made us teenagers really enjoy life in Manzanar.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things also in oral histories is because the site was only established 30 years ago, most of the people we're talking to, and doing oral histories with were teenagers or young adults in the camp. And so a lot of people will talk about how, it's really their parents who struggled and who lost so much, and they did everything they could to make sure that their children had as normal of a childhood as they could under these circumstances. Yeah, Thank you, Rosie. Hopefully more people have questions for you.
Well, I just want to say before they ask any more question, Elisa, you did a beautiful job. I enjoyed listening. Some of it I knew, but it was just you did a terrific job. And I know that I hope everyone was able to enjoy your speeches as much as I did.
Well, that's a high compliment, Rosie, coming from you since you lived it. And I have to tell everyone, Rosie and her sister Grace have worked with us on pretty much every project we have done and have been so gracious about sharing their photo albums, doing their oral histories, just being open to helping in every way they could tell the stories. And so I always, tell the Nisei, which is Rosie's generation, first generation born in America, and their parents' generation was Issei, which is first generation born in Japan, that the greatest tribute to the Issei is their kids and the people I know. And I still think of Rosie as a kid, even though she's, what, Rosie, 96 now?
96, going on 97.
Yeah, so thank you, Rosie. Yeah. Hopefully we can get some more questions, because Rosie and I can call each other and have a mutual admiration society, but it's a rare opportunity for you to have a chance to ask her questions.
I have a question for
Yes.
Rosie. Did you ever get an opportunity to interact with any of the young people from Lone Pine or the other communities around there, or was that restricted?
Not in the area, just only in Manzanar, but we did communicate with other camp people by mail. And it's very interesting that some of my junior high school classmates were way out and Rower. I said, where in the heck is that? And they said, it's just a horrible place. It was a swampy place. But as far as interacting, it was just only in camp. And what I can say is one of the best things that happened by being put into camp, if you can say that, is meeting people that are still dear, dear friends of mine, if they're still alive. I'll know when we have our reunion this year in May, but meeting and getting to know these people from other than where we lived, it was one of the highlights of my life, I would say, because before the war, we just clung to each other in a small community and didn't really expand to others. Whereas in camp, we met people from all over the California map. And that to me was just great.
And I want to, I know Richard Osborne is on here somewhere. I want to extend a special invitation to Richard that I can send you the information for the Manzanar reunion. And actually anyone is welcome to attend, but it's 2 nights in Las Vegas, May 16th and 17th this year. It's basically 2 banquet nights, but you get to hang out with a few Manzanar Rangers and Rosie and a bunch of people who were in Manzanar. And there's nothing quite like being in a room full of people and their families. So just a quick advertisement for that. But Richard, I think it'd be awesome if you and Jenny could come, because you've worked so much for and on Manzanar. But anyone is welcome to come. And this is the first one that we will have had since 2019. I should say they will have had, it's not my reunion, but I've been to 19 of theirs and 1 of my own reunions. So you can tell where I like to spend my time.
Thank you very much. You did a wonderful job today. Both you and Rosie are doing a wonderful job. We greatly appreciate you sharing this with us in Porterville, and a little sorry that we don't have more people in the audience. We do have people that are on Zoom that are not visible here, but we thank you so much for taking the time and the energy to share the stories with us.
We do have a question in the chat on Zoom.
Okay.
So the question is, were Japanese Americans in any danger after Pearl Harbor? were the camps made to protect Japanese Americans from attacks from angry mobs?
Was that for me or you?
That's for you, Rosie. Were you
Oh.
in danger after Pearl Harbor? Did you
You
feel?
know, I've read stories and books about people, how they were abused and picked on, but you know, I didn't meet any of that after the camp. The I just I couldn't believe some of the things that happened, like Sue Emery in her book, how she was treated, and these other people that I read about. But I didn't have any of that. As soon as I came out of camp, I took an exam and worked for the county public library. They were, I think educated people are the ones that are just understanding. They were just wonderful to me. And after I left the county library, I went work for the Los Angeles City School District. And there again, just wonderful people. So I didn't have any prejudice working. The only time when I had my children and I moved to Montebello, I worked for the Montebello School District. I was the first Japanese American to be hired. There were no blacks hired. I asked, is there any black? No. So that particular area was very prejudiced. And this one department, which was a purchasing department, they were from the Mid-East and they were so prejudiced. And so my boss, knowing this, every morning came and checked with me to see, how's everything? Is everything okay? I said, fine. Well, in the coffee room, one of the ladies just, I guess, lost her thinking. And she just thought these Japs, they're hiring now for teachers is really something. Well, I just sat there, listened, and you'll be surprised. There were about 5 other people in the coffee room, all attacked her, and she had to leave the coffee room. But the prejudice was there, but I didn't really feel it except that one time. But no, educated people, when you're among them, you're safe. They're smart.
Rosie, could you talk for a second about your friend Johnny and what he did before you left and your reconnection to him?
Oh,
later?
Johnny Reeves, my black classmate. He was a leader at Lafayette. Lafayette Junior High School was made up of, I would say at the time we went, I'd say about 60% black, maybe 10% Mexican, and the rest was Asians and white. But he was the only person that came to say goodbye to us when we left for camp. He couldn't figure out why we were going, but he just said, I'm going to miss you. And so, as I said, he was the only one that came to say goodbye. And later on, my Chinese friends, my classmates, they came to Las Vegas and we had dim sum. And they told me that, you think it was easier for us, but it wasn't. He said, we were picked on thinking that we were Japanese. And we tried to, but some of them were beaten up because they thought they were Japanese. But he said, well, I'm so glad that it's all over with, but it was good to know that our Chinese friends really were thinking about us, but there were kids and parents said, you are not to go anywhere near them. So they listened to their parents. So, but we were still good friends after the war.
I have a few more questions in the chat. This one is, has one of the projects been to restore some of the gravestones that have deteriorated or vandalized?
Yeah, so we have there's actually one of the cool stories is somebody from one of the local communities had taken one of the gravestones, I think as, you know, a landscape feature or something. And a number of years ago, it showed up back at the site. And so we were able to restore it to the grave. Some of the other graves were marked with upright pieces of wood, you know, during the war. So we can only restore what was there during the wartime. You know, we can't like put new gravestones that weren't there. In fact, there used to be a stone for baby Jerry Ogawa. And sometime over the years, I don't know if it was Manzanar Committee or somebody took the old stone and replaced it with a newer stone. But we have no idea where the original went, which is what we would most like to have. And in fact, baby Jerry's body is not there. There are still at least 6 bodies in the cemetery and potentially a 7th. We know there are 3 older men and 3 babies. We do have a brochure on the cemetery that tells people, you know, who was in each grave. We know at least 9 were removed after the war. But most of the people in the camp were cremated, like Rosie's sister Ruby and the little twins, Diane and Sachiko. And so people's ashes were held either in the hospital or in the Buddhist temple. So the cemetery was large because at the time they created the camp, they had no idea how long people would be there. I don't think they really thought about, you know, Buddhist faith and cremation, you know, so a lot of things. I think the cemetery that we have today is like 1/6 the size of what was planned.
And we have one more question. This one's for Rosie. Have you visited Japan ever since? Japan seems like such a beautiful place to visit. I hope to go there in the future.
Yes, my mother has a sister, younger sister in Tokyo. And so there was Montebello has a sister city, Ashia. And so I told my sister, Grace, I said, hey, I hate to travel, but can we go to Japan with this group and visit my mother's sister? So we did go. And it was really a thrill to meet my mother's younger sister, who actually looked older than my mother. She was about 8 years younger than my mother, but my mother looked real good compared to this. But anyway, it was a really nice visit with them. And since then, the children came to California and also to Las Vegas. In fact, one of the sons bought a place here in Las Vegas, so came often, but now I think they're no longer around. But yes, it was a very good trip. But the one thing I mentioned to my cousin is, you know, everyone says Japanese people are very polite. But I said, you know, here I am on Ginza looking for something. I was kind of, looking for something, hoping that one of them would stop and ask me, can I help you? But no, they were so busy. They kept running back and forth. And I said, you know, I don't think that's very polite. If that was me and I see someone confused, I would say, can I help you? But no, because they know we were Americans. They said, we can spot an American. Even though my face was Japanese, they said, we know you're American. I said, oh, okay. But I said, that to me, that was not very polite. I thought they should be helping people out if they look confused. But I did enjoy the trip. It's a very clean city.
You know, I had an interesting experience somewhat related to that. And that was one day working at Manzanar, 7 women came in. And I can't remember if it was 3 appeared to be Japanese and 4 appeared to, it was 3 and 4. Anyway, they were all sisters. And it was not uncommon for parents to send their children back to Japan, either to be raised, you know, for cultural things or for childcare. You know, a lot of times the immigrant parents were working so much, they would send the kids back to an aunt or a grandparent. And for those who went over, they're known as kibe, which are people who returned. So in this case, this couple had 7 little girls, and they sent them to Japan to be cared for by an aunt. And then the war broke out, and the 7 little girls were in Japan, and the parents were here in the United States, and they ended up in Manzanar. And so when these women came to visit, they wanted to see where their parents had been. And it was very clear that, you know, that culturally they were different. They looked similar, but they dressed differently. They talked differently. I would say, Rosie, that the Japanese were much more polite, but it's really interesting, you know, because here's a family who's coming to try to understand what their parents went through. And some of them came back and lived in the United States as Americans, and some remained in Japan. One of the things I did not talk about, but I think is one of the most complex and controversial parts of the history, is something called a loyalty questionnaire, which was done in 1943 to segregate people. And that's its own chaotic piece of history. But the effect was that, you know, in many cases, it split up families, and you have people who never saw each other again or never talked to each other again, based on questions that the government forced them to answer in 1943.
Wow.
I want to give a quick plug for a digital repository called the Densho Digital Repository. And there are a number of Manzanar collections on there. And 2 of the collections on there, one is Rosie's photo albums, that you can go on there and look at pictures of, you know, her family. And also her sister Grace donated her photo albums to us, which we had digitized, and they are also on Densho. You can also see paintings of Kongo Takamura, and we have over 100 of our oral history interviews there. We're also working on a mobile app, so that when you visit the site, you can load that and go around to different places and learn about some of the stories of those places.
Gas price is probably about the same, but.
Well, thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation, Elisa, and Rosie, thank you for your contribution in this. Do we have any last questions before we? Okay, we have one more here.
Hello there. I have a
Hi.
question.
Closer to your.
Oh, close to like
There
this.
we go.
Oh, hello. I have a question for Rosie. So, you said that a lot of people were very nice to you after the war, and I was curious. Were you shown a lot of
They're not like that.
care and like a lot of people who actually showed you a lot of love.
Just a minute. Judy, I can, will you go to another room, please? No, I'm sorry. My daughter was talking and my hearing aid picks up her instead of you. Could you repeat that?
Oh, it's okay. I was just wondering, after the war, you said a lot of people, you said a lot of people were nice to you, and I was wondering that, did a lot of them actually, were a lot of people very nice to you or loving?
Well, they showed no prejudice, and some of them, in fact, one of them says, "Where in the hell have you been?" And I said, "I've been in camp. Don't you read the paper?" And it was a little young classmate, and she said, "I haven't seen you in such a long time." But before I forget, when I think of Porterville, when Elisa mentioned she's going to be at Porterville, the first thing that hit me was when I was working for the Montvale School District, our friend Evan used to bring oranges, navel oranges, to our school district. And we bought it at, I think every time I think of Porterville, I think of oranges. Do you still have oranges there?
Yeah, I remember my
Oh,
mom would always give
the
out
best.
oranges.
They were the best. But anyway, no, the only, not the only time, but the one time that really hurt me was after finishing work at, I was working at the uh, county library, and my sister was working for the LA Unified. We met on Fifth and Broadway before we left for home and catch the bus. And on the corner was a Newberry 5 and 10 store, which they had a counter where they served. I don't know, probably you won't remember, but if you see an old movie, you'll see a drugstore. They have a counter and they serve lunch. And my Grace and I sat and I said, gee, I feel like an ice cream sundae. Let's have an ice cream sundae before the bus comes. Well, there were about 15 of us sitting there, and the waitress served everyone except Grace and me. And here we were just, I was really waiting for the ice cream sundae. And it was time for our bus to come, and she never served us. So I said, oh, the heck with it. And we left. And that was the most disappointing time that we had. And the other time was when my sister and I decided right after camp that she was going to pick up her stuff, that she was living in Salt Lake. So on the bus ride, they stopped at a little restaurant. I think it was the city of Baker. And everyone got off for a bite to eat. And a black man was sitting behind us. We were in the back. And I said, come on, let's go. He said, no, I'm going to sit here and meditate. So I said, well, come on, Grace, let's go get a bite to eat. So we went, and they served everyone but Grace and me. And so we came back to the bus, and the guy says, how was it? I said, well, we didn't get served. He said, that's why I didn't go. I stayed and meditated. And so then this one Caucasian lady knew that we weren't served. She brought Grace and me a sandwich each. And so I gave this black man part of mine. And I said, that was the only 2 times actually after the war that I really felt that I was Japanese and they were just prejudiced against me. But other than that, those are the only 2 times. And Elisa knows how much I like ice cream sundae. And she says, let me know what you want. And she said, but at that time, ice cream sundae to me was just the thing that I missed most in camp, other than the freedom, of course. I don't know if
Jim,
I answered your question.
Jim, there's one more question in the chat.
Okay.
This is for Rosie. Was there difficulty acclimating to life outside of the camp?
Was it difficult? What?
Was it difficult acclimating?
No, well, by that time I was, 19 years old, going on 20. And somehow, I don't know why I felt like normal rather than, gee, I was in camp. But because I think working for the county public library, they made you feel part of them, that I just, to me, I felt comfortable. Whereas I thought I should be, kind of nervous, but no, right after the war, I just fell right into it, felt normal. I don't know what others, but I think it's the people that you work with who are educated and, that are understanding. I think that makes you feel good. But first I want to tell you, around the corner where I work, I was telling my daughter, See's Candy. I think they're about $25 a pound now. And at that time, it was 60 cents a pound, the box. And I said, gee, can you believe it was 60 cents a pound? Then it went up to 80 cents a pound, then $1.20. But today, I said, well, but anyway, I was all of a sudden that just brought to mind, but just top of my head. But anyway, I hope I answered your question. I always go off the trail.
You got me hungry now, Rosie, for See's candy and
Yeah.
ice cream. I would just say, like during the program where I talked about 10,000 lives, 10,000 stories,
Uh-huh.
the stories after the war for some families, they say was harder than in camp, because in camp, even though it was crummy living conditions, you had a place to sleep, you had meals. Whereas at the end of the war, people had to leave. Many of them had lost everything and had to start over again. There is a book called Life After Manzanar that I highly recommend. There's also one called Children of Manzanar that's about the childhood experience. And in fact, some of Rosie's cousins are on the cover. The other book I would recommend is there's one called In Good Conscience by a woman named Shizue Siegel. And there are no lack of stories about crummy things that people did and hateful things that people did to Japanese Americans. But this book, In Good Conscience, is about people not of Japanese ancestry who stepped forward to care for family farms, who held people's property for them, who went to camp in some cases, like some of the ministers went to camp to help people out. So there is a lot of darkness and a lot of sadness and a lot of stories that I've heard that make me, want to scream in anger. But then there's also stories of hope. And I guess that's always true in all of history. I'll give you the last word, Rosie, if you have any words of wisdom that you want people to go forward with, or if you have an advertisement to visit Manzanar. But thank you all. Any extra words of wisdom, Rosie?
Well, it's just that for everyone, especially the kids, education, because I think prejudice breeds from, that's how people become prejudiced, because they don't understand. And so when I used to speak to the kids, I keep telling them, ask questions, but learn everything you can. And if you hit a stumbling block, use that as a stepping stone to get better yourself. But I think education is the top as far as I can. I keep telling my great grandkids, study, ask questions, but I think education is the most important thing for everyone.
Well, and that's fitting because this is for a college group.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
much love to you, Rosie, and to Richard at Porterville, and to everybody who's been part of this. I understand it's been recorded, so we will make sure that information gets out. And happy anniversary, Richard.
Thank you all.
Thank you
All
very much.
right, this was wonderful. Thank you.
Love you, Rosie.
Thank you.
All right, so wonderful. We have a class coming shortly, so I guess we'll need to wrap this up. If anyone would like extra credit, we have cards. We'll have that here by the door when you leave, one per student. So just avail yourself of that. And thank you all for coming. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. This was really great to see the people here and the people online. And this was a wonderful presentation. Yes. Yes, let's give them a hand. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you later, Rosie.
Yeah, thank you. See you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Take care. Everybody stay safe, please.
Thank
You too,
you.
Rosie.